Okay, welcome everybody to our February WEAll Talk. I'm really excited to see your faces. Some of them familiar, some of them not, but this is the beauty of these gatherings every month. We're gonna have the pleasure to listen to Michael Weatherhead, Anna Chrysopoulou, and Mark Anielski, who are the authors of the Failure Demand Report. But at the same time, once they have finalized their presentation, there is the space for contributions, for sharings, for questions, for make this a very interactive event. I don't think I'm forgetting anything apart from introducing our wonderful speakers today. Michael Weatherhead, colleague and the WEAll organization and projects co-lead. Anna Chrysopoulou is a policy and research associate with WEAll Scotland and an associate member of the Institute of Environmental Management and Assessment. And Mark Anielski is an economist strategist specializing in the economics of well-being. So it is my pleasure, and I'm really grateful for your time, for what you're going to be sharing with all of us here today. And Michael, the mic is yours.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Anna. So very good to see everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm just going to share my screen, and do let me know if you can see that in full presenter mode. Just give me a thumbs up, someone. Anna, perhaps? Yeah, wonderful. Okay, well, so we have the hour, and I'm not certainly going to be talking for the hour. I'm going to be presenting for maybe 15 to 20 minutes or so. As Anna said, I've got my co-authors, the other Anna and Mark, along with me for answering any questions that you might have. But just I want to premise this WEAll Talk with a little bit about what it is and what it's not. This is not just going to be a presentation of the results of a piece of research. We want to articulate to you much more how we went about doing the work. Why did we think about doing it in the first place? How it was received, and also a question to all of you in terms of how we might take this type of work forward. So we want it to be very participatory. That's why I don't want to talk for sort of much more than 15, 20 minutes. And really we'll leave it at the end of the presentation with these questions for you to sort of chew on and for us sort of to discuss as a group. Okay, so that's what the sort of idea, the plan is, if you like. So failure demand, counting the true costs of an unjust and unsustainable economic system. With this particular work, it's a bit of a, perhaps it's a bit of a departure from what we often do in the wellbeing economy. What we often do in the wellbeing economy is we are looking to sort of tell that new narrative that what is the economic system we can step into. But with this particular piece of work, we felt that there was a particular angle that we could go with, which could really cut across political divides and boundaries and have many different constituencies and audiences respond to what we're trying to talk about by framing what's going on in the current system in a different way. And that framing is failure demand. And what do we mean by failure demand? Well, what it is ultimately getting caught in a cycle of pain to fix what we continue to break. So we have an economic system which is sort of in pursuit of economic growth, but in that pursuit of economic growth, harm is created to both people and the planet, which requires governments to spend money to respond to these harms, which then justifies the growth model. So we're in a sort of a vicious circle, if you like. And we really wanted to sort of highlight this perverse cycle that we've got into, and to really use this phrasing because we feel it touches upon one of the really important framings of a well-being economy, which is what if we got it right the first time around? So not actually having to pay to fix what our economic system continues to damage, but actually not to damage in the first place. Okay, so that was why we felt that we would go into this sort of departure from, say, some of the other work that we do, and actually burrow down in, quite a detailed research way into the current economic system. So that's what failure demand is. And where we focused the work was where we have two of our strongest hubs in Canada and in Scotland. Now, for the sharp-eyed geographers of you out there, the shape on the left is clearly not Canada, and Canada, it was felt, was too big an ask given the resources that we had available, and therefore we focused the work on the province of Alberta. So that shape on the left, the green shape, is the Albertan province in Canada, and the one, of course, in yellow is the country of Scotland. It wasn't just because we had hubs that we could work with in the execution of the work that we chose these two locations. We also felt there were certain similarities which lent themselves to doing this work in these two locations in order to offer a good comparator piece, because here we have, although very different sort of geographical sizes, we have similar-ish populations, two territories where hydrocarbons have proliferated in recent decades, the production of, and both are in countries, sort of larger countries, the United Kingdom or Canada, which perhaps lean more towards an Anglo-Saxon free market model, the type of model that we're suggesting often in our narrative around a wellbeing economy that we most strongly need to move away from. So that was part of the reason, but there's no reason why we couldn't have selected other territories. And given the fact that one of the questions we'll be asking you is where do you think this work might fly in other territories, I think it will be worth pointing out to you also some of the other reasons why, what criteria you would need to have in place in deciding whether or not one could repeat this work in other places. Now, this is a necessarily messy diagram. I've not tried to make it any less messy, because the point is that in trying to understand the failures, the demand created on government budgets by the failures of the current economic system, we're talking about a highly interconnected system. Now, with an economic system as complex and with so many different sectors as the economy, we still had to focus in on a sort of few key principal areas. And critical in the way that we decided upon this was very early on to establish a steering committee for this work to help guide us in our thinking. And we settled on three key areas of the economy, key to sort of human needs, but also the environment. And those are the spaces of paid work, of housing, both being sort of key needs of us, of humans, and also the environment, how the economy is interacting with the environment. And it's not just through direct impact on government spending. We wanted to explore the potential interconnections between these different three spheres, as well as the indirect impacts. And this is not an attempt to draw a systems diagram here. It's just an attempt to demonstrate that there are multiple pathways to government spending in response to failures that come about through these different or misfunctioning sectors of the economy, if you like. So as you can see in the blue circles across the top, we have climate change, in-work poverty, insecure and precarious work, as well as absence of secure, safe and affordable housing. Now, they don't all directly result in government spending. Some of them indirectly create negative health outcomes, which then also create further demands on government spending. So we just wanted to articulate the fact that everything is interconnected, and we needed to sort of think carefully through, therefore, what are the key failure demands that we needed to look at in this work. So how did we look at the numbers? And this is a numbers report. This is a data-rich report. Having said that, it's not new data. It's data which we have drawn from often national government data sets, but also this report is very much built on excellent analysis, which has been done already in the paid work sector, the housing sector, and the environment space. So it's very much standing on the shoulders of giants. What's interesting, and what was very interesting actually in a response to a data request of the UK Office for National Statistics, was we piqued their interest in terms of not the data we were asking for, but the way we were wanting to frame the data, which was something quite new to them. But how did we look at the numbers? Well, we decided to look at them in three ways. Firstly, we really wanted to understand what was the size of the failure demand. For this report to be impactful, we really needed to understand the big numbers as they related to paid work, housing, and the environment. However, we also wanted to explore the length of the likely, because of course we didn't know the answer, but we suspected the likely dysfunctional nature of the paid work, the housing, and the environment sectors in relation to the economy. But then we also, critically, we did want to look into the future. We wanted to think about what the future could look like potentially if we had a different economic system. So I'm just going to go through in a fairly sort of light touch way some of the results and how we demonstrated, how we presented the data in these three formats: size, length, and what the future could look like. So if we start off looking at the area of paid work, let's focus here on Scotland. I'm going to look at Scotland for both paid work and housing, and then switch to Alberta for environment. But if you look in the report, there are sections on Scotland and Alberta in the paid work, in the housing, as well as in the environment sectors. So firstly, thinking about the size of the numbers, what was impressive to us was the scale of the numbers when we in fact added them up. And for the UK, or sorry, exclusively for Scotland, this is not the UK, this is just for Scotland, we found a figure of £750 million per annum spent on failure demand on average per annum between 2014 and 2019. That's a significant figure of money. So I mean, this is not, okay, you know what, we know the system creates some negative externalities, but it's okay, we'll just pick up this, we'll just pay for those sort of small damages that are caused. No, the figures needing to be paid by government are significant in meeting the failures of these dysfunctional systems. And in terms of the scale, we didn't just necessarily present the numbers in terms of financial numbers. You know, in the case of Scotland, we're seeing consistently over 500,000 people in the employment market in precarious employment. That's 20% of those in work suffer from precarious work, which is a significant percentage of the workforce population. Now, as I mentioned, we needed to think very carefully, which is why we have had a steering group, exactly which bits of data we could consider to be failure demand, because we needed to only look at those government spending streams which were responses to failures in the paid work sector or the housing sector, versus those which would be genuine investments. And that was the value of having a steering group to always sense check our thinking. Now, in this instance, this won't be familiar so much to you if you are not familiar with UK government spending, but here we have a breakdown of how that failure demand in the paid work sector looks like. Now, the majority or the largest single item is in the form of tax credits. And if you don't know what tax credits are, it's basically a supplement by government to poorly paid work. It's quite insane if you think about it. It is government topping up poverty wages in order for people to be able to survive, not thrive, just survive. And that is the single largest proportion of the failure demand in the case of Scotland. However, there are multiple other payments that government needs to make. In the case here, we have school meals, we have housing benefits, we have income support, pension credits, many different ways the government has to supplement the fact that we have a labour market which permits poor and low wages and precarious work. Okay, so that's a key point to think about when we get to the end and we discuss, you know, whether or not this might be something that you might be interested in doing in the territory in which you're based. You know, what exactly constitutes failure demand, what constitutes investment. Now, in terms of trying to understand what the future might look like in a well-being economy, we didn't have the resources to sort of do a significant piece of counterfactual work, which were to say, okay, if the economy was designed differently, what would be the payments, what would failure demand look like? Because we're not we don't necessarily believe that a well-being economy will eliminate all failure demand, but we would hope that a well-being economy which deals with fairness, dignity, inequality would significantly reduce failure demand in these different sectors. Now, what this graph shows you is the difference in government spending per household for in-work poverty versus those around the median in terms of quintiles of household income in the United Kingdom. So the purple line, the lower line, is the third and fourth quintiles. So the sort of 20% above and below the sort of 50% midpoint. And the in-work poverty are the sort of the lowest two quintiles. And you can see there is quite a considerable difference in spending by government for the different cohorts. And so the idea of including data such as this in the report was to articulate what the potential savings might be for government if it looked to try and tackle head-on this issue of low pay and precarious employment. So that's just a snapshot. There is much, much more data, much more analysis in the report with respect to paid work. If we shift to housing, and again, focusing on Scotland, big numbers coming out here, and housing can be viewed in many, many different ways, a dysfunctional housing sector. The way we chose to look at it was to focus on homelessness. Now, homelessness is not just sleeping on the streets. Homelessness varies from couch surfing to poor temporary accommodation all the way through to rough sleeping. And the numbers that we drew together were estimates of over £100 million per annum just out on the cost of temporary accommodation. So local government having to house those who cannot afford to move into the housing sector. So significant sums of money addressing failures in the way the housing system is designed. But it's not a problem which is just which is suddenly is a new one. Going back to that second point about looking at the data over time, we're looking at over 10,000 households in Scotland in temporary accommodation for the past decade. This is not an issue, which is suddenly emerged. And if you look here, this is actually over a 2-decade time frame, and you're seeing, in fact, an increase in the numbers here in terms of that form of temporary accommodation. So it's a consistent problem. And the reason why why we wanted to pull out this point, not just the size of the problem in any one given year, but the length of the problem, is to sort of combat the argument that, well, we have a policy here or we have a policy there and it's made a difference. Yes, there have been policies instigated over the years, but the general direction of travel has not changed. And therefore, these are tweaks. These are not the necessary transformational policy changes that are required to actually bend these curves in the right direction. And it's not just the costs of actually housing families who cannot afford themselves to get into either the rented or the purchased housing sector. There are phenomenal health costs related with poor housing and the situation of homelessness. One study estimating over £900 million excess. So this is excess of other cohorts within the population as a result of mental health, substance misuse, huge differentials between those who have been or considered homeless and other cohorts of the population. So as I said right at the beginning, there are direct impacts on the government coffers and also indirect, particularly through poor health outcomes as a result of a dysfunctional housing sector. Now, if we switch our attention both geographically to Alberta and also to the environment, the numbers go up in multiples. If we firstly look at reclamation costs, so here we're talking about reclamation costs, so basically repair costs involved with well sites, pipelines, and oil in the province of Alberta. We're looking at a staggering figure built up over decades, now amounting to something like 260 billion Canadian dollars. This is phenomenal amount of money, which is a liability, and which, because of the failure of the government to account for these environmental externalities, this is running up the credit card, and there's been virtually no money put aside to deal with this. And so, you know, the numbers are quite astronomical. But that's not the only sort of failure demand in terms of the environment that was analysed or identified in Alberta. There's also the societal health costs from air pollution, estimated at 9 billion Canadian dollars again per annum. So phenomenal numbers. And these are also numbers, I'm not showing you the Scotland ones just so I can show you numbers from both locations, but you know, these are sizable numbers in Scotland as well as in Canada. But also lastly, you know, there is a significant bill to the Alberta government from more extreme weather-related incidences and having to pick up the costs of floods and storms and heat waves, et cetera, which are only multiplying and growing. You know, these are going, it's not a case that we can now say, well, you know what, the economy is producing so much wealth or so much value. Yes, there are certain costs associated with it, but they're not too significant and we can sort those out. You cannot sort of sideline these type of externalities. That there is no way, and it's been really a stain on the economics profession that we've sort of not considered externalities as part of the conversation really to date in a serious or meaningful way. So the numbers were huge. They've been significant for a serious amount of time, but in the study, and just shown in that one graph with respect to paid work, there is the possibility that under a different system, we could see a significant reduction in those failures. So where next from here? Well, firstly, we need to start tackling policies that support genuine living wage floors. You know, there has been, and we saw this in the United Kingdom, in Scotland, quite a significant increase in what's referred to as the gig economy and 0 hours contracts. So basically withdrawing any type of financial security from a significant proportion of the working age population. And these type of policies need to be rolled back, or the liberalization of this part of the labour market really needs to be reversed. But in addition to that, we need to be supporting significantly more than we are at the moment, purposeful enterprise models which don't just treat employees as a cost to minimize or ideally take off the costs of running business, but actually to recognize them as an investment and to ensure that their salaries, their wages are associated with that mindset. In terms of housing, there are an array of different ways that we need to look at this issue. And I haven't really talked about it here in the presentation, but it goes into it in a bit of detail in the report. There has been a huge financialization of the housing sector in recent decades. Much money is going into the housing space because it is viewed as an investment opportunity. This is having all kinds of negative externalities, which are resulting in failure demand from greater numbers of homelessness because people cannot afford the rents, they cannot afford the spiraling housing prices, and it's quite extraordinary, the divergence. And we don't have the data here to show you, but that can easily be generated and shared with you, the divergence in many countries of salary levels to housing prices. They have become genuinely disconnected in recent years. So actually looking at balanced housing stocks, tenants' rights, and appropriate land pricing are all key policy spaces that we need to tackle much more seriously than we have done thus far. And then lastly, to deal with these enormous environmental figures that I showed you with respect to Alberta, we need to have those environmental impacts fully incorporated as liabilities on government's balance sheets. If we had a proper balance sheet which looks at assets and liabilities, including these environmental liabilities, we would be making significantly different decisions to those decisions that we've made in previous decades and cannot afford to keep making in the same way. So there's more policy details. The WEAll Scotland Hub generated some more specific policy requests of the Scottish Government when this report was produced. So there is more detail behind this work as well. But how has it been received? Because I said it wasn't just a presentation of the results. I also wanted to share with you a little bit of the journey this report's been on. And in 3 words, I would say it's been received with real interest. In terms of Scotland, the BBC Scotland economics editor wrote an op-ed on this report, which was got significant coverage for us. A motion was presented in the Scottish Parliament to deal with this. And what was nice about this, and so much of the work in Scotland by the Wellbeing Economy Alliance Scotland Hub, is that it is trying to push work in a sort of non-political, partisan, cross-party sort of way. And the messaging of failure demand is one that all parties' ears prick. It piques all of their interests for different reasons. We also had reference to the report in a UK parliamentary briefing note ahead of a parliamentary debate on the wellbeing economy that took place at the end of last year. And we've also had presentations and discussions with Scottish civil servants. So it's really cutting through, I think, in Scotland. In Canada, the WEAll Canadian Hub has shared it with senior civil servants in the Canadian Finance Ministry, also had discussions in the Environment Ministry on how to build on this work, perhaps to go broader than just the focus on Alberta. And Mark can speak much more to the sort of initiatives and efforts he's been involved with in Canada in trying to bring this kind of understanding of the data into government circles. Now, questions we've been pushing out to policymakers since we've launched this report have looked something like this. Really a challenge to, what is happening that, if accelerated, could break these patterns? What bold new moves would you like to undertake? And what more other than numbers will help advance the cause for measures that can address these failure demands? Now, we've had some really interesting discussions with policymakers. I have noticed, I think, a sort of a desire amongst policymakers to sort of just be told, well, what is the policy prescription? What's the silver bullet? But, as articulated in both this presentation and the report, this is a problem which has been around for a significant amount of time. So it's not just any one single policy that is going to change the needle. It's going to be a change of multiple policies, a change, firstly, a reimagining of the economy, and then the suite of policies that need to follow along with that. So it's a journey with policymakers, because that's a challenge to them, to get them to think beyond sort of a conventional, perhaps rather targeted policy ask. But that's policymakers. As I promised at the beginning, I wanted to move on to thinking about what questions you might consider so you can sort of contribute to this conversation that we're having, because we don't want this work to stop with the report. We want to think about how it can, really grow legs and go further, and we can build on what we've done. So we've got a couple of questions that we want you to chew over. You can absolutely throw more questions into the mix, but a couple to think about. Is replication of this work in different territories of interest? Because I know that we have people beyond Canada and Scotland on this call. And then also, if you are quite familiar with this type of work and have some ideas as to where you might think work in those territories where this has already been done, so Canada and Scotland, what might be the next step we might want to take this work on with? So that's where I'm going to finish, Anna. I've been hogging the limelight. I've got two far more than able me co-authors on the call, Anna and Mark, here to far better answer any questions. But just have those questions in mind. I can drop them into the chat, but I'll stop sharing now so we can all see each other again. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you to the three of you for this incredible, you know that I said that already because this was launched last year, but thank you for this incredible work. So how we're going to make it now that we can all see each other, and if you put yourselves in the gallery mode. So you all know that Zoom has the raise hand option, just in case you want to participate, you want to ask questions, you want to respond to the questions that Michael just brought to all of us. Maybe you're just thinking about it. So I'm going to be naming your name, and then you can open and ask the questions or share your own ideas about it, about what Michael just asked about. So Renee, you're going to be the first one. And I'm really excited to see you in here. Welcome from the Newfoundland and Labrador area in Canada.
Thank you so much, Anna. My name is Renee Ryan, and I'm the Director of Poverty Reduction and the Community Sector with the provincial government here in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador in Canada. And this is just such great timing. There's some really good things, exciting things, I think, happening here right now. Our premier pulled together a group to establish or develop a health accord, looking at, we've got really problematic health outcomes here in this province. And this health accord is a 10-year plan with the focus of moving upstream and to really focus on the social determinants of health. So we're not paying so much down the road, which is, I think, such a great fit. And I think that's what failure demand is all about. And we are also working on a social well-being plan that I'm leading through my work with my division. And that's very much, again, what it's about. It's about social determinants of health and how much can we do from the very early stages, from the very beginning stages, to set people up for well-being and to thrive throughout the lifespan, so that we don't have this excessive failure demand down the road. This is the first presentation. I haven't read the report yet, but I'm really, really excited to dig into this a bit more, because I think it's really such a great concept that's really going to fit well with the work that we're doing here. Will inform the work that we're doing here, and I think it will also give us some really good support as we move forward to make some recommendations and to work towards some actions. So I don't really have a question or an answer, just to say I really, really like what you're talking about here.
Well, that's great, Renee. Thank you. And I would encourage you to sort of reach out, and I can put you in contact, or Anna can put you in contact with both Mark and Yannick. Yannick heads up the WEAll Canada hub. Mark in particular knows very well, better than anyone else on the call, I suspect, what data is available in Canada and why it was that we focused on Alberta and perhaps not one of the other provinces. But yes, they would be the ones I would for sure put you in contact with.
Mark, I don't know if you would like to add anything else, or I can pass it on to the next person.
I just wanted to thank Renee. I think your approach is absolutely appropriate. I've worked on the End Poverty Edmonton strategy, where we try to change the conversation from deficits to assets. So what are the, are we actually assessing people's well-being assets? And that puts a different lens on public policy, and especially when we're trying to deal with intractable things like poverty. So thanks, Renee, for your comments, and good luck in Newfoundland.
Thank you, Mark. Susana from Portugal, welcome.
Yes, hello, everyone. I would like to start by thanking the authors for having this report. I would say that for me, your report was like, it made it much more easier to explain the well-being economy. Sometimes when you have to explain the first time, you always get this lot of questions, and now I have this very simple way of explaining it, and I think it's just great. This is just such a great contribution for the communication of the concept, but of course, and all the debate, and all the discussion around it, it's really, really relevant, and I think very useful to get a conversation with politicians, for example, and even some opinion makers, because they always speak this economic language that sometimes I'm from an environmental NGO, sorry, I didn't explain. So for us, sometimes it's difficult to start this discussion at the same level, and I think these kind of reports really help us to bring in some arguments, some reasons why we should be doing, at least thinking about doing things differently. And so about your question of replication, definitely we would love to have, and maybe something we can think, Anna, in the Iberian Hub, to have something for Portugal and Spain, maybe, I don't know. I think this could be a very, very relevant study to help us increase the debate around the well-being economy. Also, we will have, because we've been organizing a few events, a discussion with other stakeholders around the well-being economy in Portugal, a vision, etc. And this year we have some initiatives scheduled. We want to have them scheduled. They're not scheduled yet because we just had elections. We don't have parliament yet, nor the government, because there was some, doesn't matter, some mistakes during the elections, and now some parts have to be repeated, etc. So everything is delayed. But two things that we would like to do: we would like to have a discussion in the parliament around the well-being economy, and I think this your report is just perfect. And also we will have a conference later in the year, and maybe I think that could also be a good moment where we can introduce this discussion. Yeah, just to have this at least two opportunities to bring this report message to Portugal, but also very interested in the replication if possible, let's say. Thank you.
No, absolutely, Susanna. I think, I mean, for sure, if you were to want to pursue this in Portugal, to replicate it with the Portuguese numbers, doing the data, but you know, it'll only get so far, I think, if you're using another country's numbers. If you have your own country's numbers, then it'll be that much more impactful. One thing I didn't mention was that one of the questions that, you know, reasonable questions that policymakers I've discussed this with have raised is, well, yes, in a wellbeing economy, it may look different because there's a reduced failure demand, but what might be the additional investment costs associated with transforming us to a wellbeing economy? And I always say that it's not simply about government spending. Wellbeing economy, the achievement of a wellbeing economy is not simply spending more government money. In the long run, if you have an economy which is correctly designed, you shouldn't need a lot of that significant amount of money which is spent on failure demand. That's not to say, though, that investment spending is not good spending. And there will be a period during a transition where there is requirement of investment spending, for example, to improve the design of the paid labor market. But I won't say any more there because I know there's some more hands up.
Can I also jump in here, and thank you so much, Susanna, for your comment. It would be wonderful indeed to have this work replicated in Portugal. And the aim actually of this report was, to be honest, not just to create a business case, not just to show them that this is the numbers, but more just to kick off a conversation that the way that we have been doing policies so far, it's not as effective as we thought it is. And if you do exactly the same work in Portugal, you will probably come up with similar numbers. But this is how you can start, a conversation with some policymakers that they are more fond of the numbers rather than the ethical aspect of things, because absolutely we shouldn't have people that they do work full-time jobs and they don't live actually decent lives. They cannot contribute to the society with the wages that they have. We absolutely shouldn't have poor people, or we shouldn't have homeless people. But apart from this ethical part, it is just a kick-off conversation that, yes, if you look at the numbers, it's also not a very efficient way for you governments, to use the taxes that we receive. And as Michael said, this is where the conversation also starts about the investment, what is avoidable and what is unavoidable. Like with the investment, obviously, we should have, and with the prevention, of course, that all the governments now, they more or less, they do focus on, we should have better results. But with what we are doing at the moment, it is a significant part of this conversation that we wanted to bring into right now. So really looking forward actually to see this type of work in Portugal as well.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Susanna. Milena, it's your turn.
Hello, great, and thank you so much, Anna, and also Michael, for the presentation and this wonderful report, which I found really inspiring. I'm sorry, just to introduce myself, I'm an associate professor at the University of Leeds, working a lot on sustainable welfare and topics like that. So I'm quite interested in this sort of from a social policy perspective, I suppose, and the debates around the growth dependency of the welfare state. So I guess a question that went through my head is sort of where inequality sits in all of this, and as a consequence, what sorts of policy recommendations you are giving to policymakers, because it seems to me that inequality is one of those things that can also be seen as one of those damaging outcomes of economic growth. And usually the position is, yeah, we need more redistribution to lower inequality. So is redistribution then failure demand? I guess the answer would be yes. But if you go and say, what are the policy approaches that we need to fix inequality more fundamentally, I guess the answers could become quite radical in terms of, we need possibly more common ownership of productive resources and infrastructures, and sort of, yeah, all the infrastructures that provide us with basic services, basically, possibly even things like caps on wealth and income. But I strongly suspect that proposals like that are not very popular with policymakers. So yes, so in that sense, I'm just very interested in, you know, what are your responses to policymakers when it comes to sort of really tackling the root causes of failure demand? Thank you.
Anna, do you want to talk about that a little bit from a Scotland perspective firstly, and then Mark, maybe jump in Canada?
Sure. And thank you so much, Milena, for the questions, actually, for the remarks. They are great and definitely to the point. First of all, you mentioned about inequalities. Where do they see it? Actually, everywhere in all these three areas, because if we look at the paid work, yes, we can see that the people that they do have the more precarious work, if you want, and the low wages are usually the people that they don't have the higher income. And usually they don't have the higher income because they might not have the same educational levels that others people do. And again, the educational levels, of course, is interlinked with the access, if you want, that people can have to education and to the levels of educational attainment that we have in Scotland and in the UK in general. In terms of the housing, it is exactly the same. If we're looking at the homeless population, and we have seen there are a number of studies, and I'm pretty sure that you are familiar with them, that the people that they do come from certain socioeconomic backgrounds, they are more likely, if you want, to be homeless compared to other peoples. And in terms of the environment, again, we have seen that communities in Scotland and beyond, that they do face more of challenges. They are the ones actually that they do get more impacted by the environmental degradation and by floods, droughts, etc., than other peoples that in more affluent, if you wish, areas. So inequalities actually sit in all these areas and in much more, obviously, because this report just focuses on these three areas, but we appreciate that we haven't covered even those areas that they were selected. We haven't covered everything, absolutely not. And there are other areas that they are also interconnected that we would really wish to explore at the same time, but it was just beyond the scope of this report. Now, in terms of policy recommendations, our aim, to be honest, was not to make ourselves particular policy recommendations, was more to kind of to suggest to policymakers to think about the issues that we have highlighted, how they could address them. And redistribution, indeed, it could be seen to a certain extent, at least, a failure demand. And, you know, we are not, by no means, we are not against some downstream measures. And we absolutely understand and I appreciate the need for the government actually to respond to immediate needs. But in some areas, we should definitely need to think about redistribution. So before starting to talking about the social security, which is absolutely vital, and there is no argument that governments should stop that, we should start thinking about what if we didn't have people that their wage was so low that they needed to ask for tax credits in the case of Scotland. Unfortunately, there is not just a very simple answer to that, like what is the best policy so that we can level all these people out of in work poverty. But it is just a question that policymakers actually should have to answer, and especially in terms of like other countries at the same time, you know, it depending on the socioeconomic and historical background of each country. So it would be unfair, if you want, for us to just provide certain recommendations, because we do appreciate that they cannot be replicated by other countries. Sometimes, some of them actually, to be honest, it would be more difficult even within Scotland. But if we do showcase that these are the areas that they really need our attention, then actually that's a good start for a conversation about, okay, how do we resolve that? And I guess that would be one of the next steps, that it's also part of this discussion with all of you today, because we have brilliant participation, we have brilliant minds in here. So we would absolutely love to hear your recommendations and what do you think that we should do next? What are the areas that you think that we should push a bit more from our perspective next. I will stop talking so that I will allow Mark also to jump in from the Canada perspective.
Thanks, Anna, and thanks, Milena. This is the issue of inequity has been my focus as a practitioner in well-being economics, which is, and Marilyn Waring is a big, advocate of this in New Zealand, is that we need to continually map the distribution of well-being, whether it's economic and including subjective well-being. Now, in Alberta, for example, the number of people living in poverty situations has been improving over time, yet 35% of Albertans currently are not earning a living wage. Now, the question is, whose failure is that? Because is it business's responsibility? Is it a collective responsibility of society? And yet the level of demand for affordable housing is sitting chronically at 10%, hasn't changed in 15 years. So we know, that chronic demand is commensurate with the living wage numbers. And I do believe that progressive tax policies have been effective. If you look at that data, you see some glimmer of hope, but clearly it's not sufficient. And chronic levels of, under living wage conditions obviously creates a knock-on effect, poor well-being conditions. And these issues seem to be intractable, at least politically.
Thank you so much, Mark and Anna and Milena. Diana, it's your turn.
Thank you. Some of what I was going to say has already been answered, so thank you very much for that. But I guess I have a problem with how this fits in the kind of wider market economy model. On the whole, increasing wages and increasing wages for large numbers of people who are on very low incomes, that is going to put a production and growth impetus into. And my concern, I guess, is that is really economic growth, which is going to be demanded to pay those higher wages, because I don't think it's going to just be done with pay policies and redistributive taxes. How do we square that with the environmental impact that's going to create? It's like I keep thinking about post-growth and the idea of us all being reliant on wage labor as the only way of creating a lack of poverty is a problem for me. So I'm wondering if you've thought about universal basic income and things as part of this. I'm also wondering, again, it's like land, especially in the UK, is very much a free market thing. So we're talking about a massive intervention potentially to try and put limits on free market activity in land. And so I was just wondering what your responses to those areas would be. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, as Anna said, we didn't, with this work, we weren't ending up with a sort of a long policy list of demands, if you like, for government. However, what you're indicating there is absolutely true. I mean, there are transformational changes that are required, which in the case of the UK, with this sort of incredible sort of land ownership model that we have here, might need actual, removal of sections of the economy from the free market and placement into different buckets, whether that be the state or the commons or whatever. So yeah, I mean, in order, the point of the report is to show the fact that small incremental policy changes as executed in recent decades have simply been insufficient to tackle this issue, and therefore significant ones need to be considered. We don't come down in the Wellbeing Economy Alliance sort of a yes or a no with respect to something like UBI. We are wanting to amplify that as a possible solution to consider, along with concepts such as universal basic services or other approaches to meeting people's needs other than the individual being wholly responsible through a wage in achieving their sort of meeting their well-being needs, if you like. But as Anna also said, it'll look very different, the policy package required, depending on the context, depending on the territory and the country. So, you know, I don't have, Diane, an easy set, but the point of the report is to say, listen, this is, you keep doing the small changes that you've been doing up to now, you simply won't see any kind of a change in this issue, which is continuing to worsen. We have to think transformationally, and therefore all policy asks need to be on the table. So it's not a very satisfactory answer to your question, because, you know, I don't think there is, in the case of Scotland, they haven't got to that, even though they're sort of a leading member of the Wellbeing Economy Government's partnership, they've not really got to the point of having the conversations about what are the really significant transformational policies that might tackle the paid work inequality issues or the housing crisis or how our relationship to nature. But